Okay. So this is continuing on our topic of learner differences. And this afternoon or this evening, we'll be looking at learning styles and multiple intelligences. Just a reminder, we are recording. So if you don't want your image used, you can just keep your camera off. But of course, feel free to turn it on at any point if you like. So in this session, we'll be looking at learning styles. We'll look at multiple intelligence theory. We'll look at the connection between them. And most importantly, we'll look at how thinking about these can help us to adapt. But first, a couple questions you can answer in the chat, and you'll see I have a series of questions. So if anything speaks to you, feel free to respond as you like. So first question, when you are reading something technical or related to science, do you find pictures and diagrams more helpful than the text? Another question would be, do you ever talk to yourself while you're reading, or do you prefer to read aloud? While participating in our virtual sessions, do you prefer to do this while standing? Or if you're sitting, do you sometimes find yourself fidgeting, maybe tapping your pen, tapping your feet? And then when it comes to group projects, do you get excited? Do you look forward to them? Or are they something that you prefer to avoid? Ah, Lorian, you love visuals. They have more explanation for you. I also, especially I find with science, just the text for me is often not enough. If it's supplemented with visuals, it makes a big difference for me. Other things, not so much, but something about like technical and science related things. Others, do any of these speak to you? You can also feel free to unmute and share your ideas if something really jumps out for you. And you're similar for sciences and technical stuff. You like to have those visuals. Yeah, something about that. And sometimes for me, even just the visuals are enough if it's a really nicely designed diagram. Go ahead, Caroline.
Okay. For me, I was reading through the. Do you ever talk to yourself while reading, or prefer to read aloud? Sometimes I can read silently, but if I'm not grasping what the message is, I tend to read aloud.
Yeah, I do the same thing. If something I'm just not getting it, I have to, yeah, reading aloud really makes a difference for me too. Oh, similar. And then when you read it aloud, do you find that you grasp it?
Sometimes, but sometimes I just have to read aloud so many times, like severally, for me to understand the concept of what I'm supposed to like respond to.
Yes, I'm the same way. And then my husband thinks I'm crazy.
My household too.
Your whole household. So Judith, do you also prefer visuals? And sometimes you feel like standing. Yeah, I'm not always like that, but sometimes I find it helpful. For me, it's usually if I'm getting sleepy. Anne says that she reads silently, but sometimes she reads aloud. And I'm curious if there's any kind of pattern in that. If you're reading something difficult, are you like Caroline and I, and that's when you feel the need to read aloud, or that's just sometimes that's how you feel? Yes, Judith, you can multitask and make supper. That is a nice thing about Zoom. Oh, so Lorian, you are a fidgeter. When you're working on something that requires attention. Mary, you really like group projects. I'm not surprised. I see you on the EMC G-chats, and I can see that you like that kind of collaboration. And Nancy, I appreciate your honesty. You prefer sitting, not standing. Generally, that's true for me as well. You may be like some of us who say, well, it depends. So different situations may call for different things, which I think is interesting as well. So the reason I ask these questions is that, I'm going to go back. We might look at these as, actually, these are some of the quiz questions. If you were to take a test or quiz about learning styles to see what kind of learning style you have, these are some of the questions really related to that. And it helps you focus reading aloud. Yes, that's a good trick too. Because that kind of, the motion of your mouth and the sound, I think, kind of pulls you back. So we might look at this as kind of those visuals with the diagrams. This is kind of oral, not oral, but oral, something you can hear, working with others, and something kinesthetic. And this is just one way to look at it. We'll explore further. So learning styles, what are we talking about with this? So this is a term that refers to a theory that people have a set way that they learn best. So if you espouse this theory, you might say that someone is a visual learner or someone is a kinesthetic learner. I have a question mark after the word theory there, because this is debatable about whether or not it's a theory. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So for example, some people learn best through seeing, while others learn best through listening, something like this. This idea is not brand new, but it really became popular in the 70s. And from there on, it started to really impact education. Okay, thank you, Khadisha. Thanks for hanging in there. So how many styles are there is a bit debatable. There are different ideas about this. Some people would say that there are 3: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So kinesthetic would be movement based. Others would say that there are 4. This is pretty popular, this acronym of VARK. So with VARK, again, we have the visual, and again, we have kinesthetic, but we have a 4th one. In this one that sees 3 ideas, writing is considered kinesthetic because you're moving, and reading is considered visual because you're seeing it. But here in VARK, they've taken the read out of visual and the write out of kinesthetic and made it its own separate category. So this is pretty common. A lot of American curriculum looks at or uses VARK. This way of looking at it. Tactile would go with kinesthetic, although you might see some people separate tactile out of it. But usually we see tactile put in with kinesthetic because we're using our hands and that kind of physical touch stimuli. Some people want a lot more styles. They need more subtlety, and so you can also find arguments for 7 styles. So here we have visual, oral, verbal. So verbal being separated from hearing to the actual speaking. Physical, basically this is kinesthetic. Logical, which is logical. And then we see social and solitary. So working alone and working with others. And you'll see this kind of some of these ideas repeated later when we look at multiple intelligences. So it depends which way you want to look at learning styles is up to you, whether you want to simplify it to 3 or separate it out into 7 or go here in the middle. It's really up to the individual. Some criticisms of learning styles. So I mentioned there's this question mark next to theory because the word theory means that we have a lot of evidence to prove it. So maybe it's not a fact, but we have a lot of scientific support and evidence. But for learning styles, there's actually no scientific evidence that supports this idea that we have learning styles, that each person has a set way that they learn best. And so theory is not really an appropriate term here. And the fact is, first of all, humans have a strong visual tendency. So whether we like to move while we learn or we like to hear things, they do feel that humans tend to learn through visual things, but all of us learned our first language through listening. We were not able to read, and so we didn't have that support of seeing words. And so we started out as very oral learners, hearing patterns, hearing language, and learning that way. And so while there is no proof for this idea of learning styles, most experts agree that people have learning preferences. So preferences is kind of a softer way of putting this. Learning styles seems to indicate that the brain is wired in some particular way, but preferences is just saying that people have ways that they prefer to learn, that they find most comfortable and most appealing. And I think that's something most people would agree with. And I would think everybody here can probably identify with that to some degree. And as mentioned, these preferences may change depending on the situation. I like movies, but if I'm reading some literature, some really good literature, I don't need those extra visuals or images. The written word is enough. However, if it's some science reading I'm doing, as I mentioned, I really like to have charts, diagrams, images like that. They really make a big difference for me. Something else I noticed, I really love audiobooks. And I tried to listen to Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astronomer. I love watching shows that he does. So I thought I would listen to a book by him, and I couldn't understand anything. I kept rewinding it and trying to listen again. And after a while, I realized that I needed the visuals that he provides in his videos in order to understand what he was talking about. And probably even reading it would have been better, but just listening to him talk about astrophysics was something I could not do. So I thought that was an interesting thing I noticed about myself. Maybe you have something similar. So regardless of whether learning styles or learning preferences is what we're talking about, whether it's an actual theory or not, there's definitely value in providing these different ways of learning in our classrooms. Classrooms tend to be visually based with a chalkboard at the front, reading, worksheets, things like that. So if we can do things to kind of vary that, it definitely helps the classroom. By appealing to these different learning styles or different learning preferences, trying to make sure that we accommodate more than one, then we make our classes more interesting, we make them more engaging, and we do make them more effective, because even if the brain is not hardwired for these things, we definitely have preferences. So if someone sees, we're going to read, but then the teacher says, okay, and now we're going to listen to something, or we're going to watch a video, or we're going to walk around and we're going to look at some texts on the wall, then these people are going to perk up a little bit. Everyone, I think, will probably perk up. When we think about these learning styles, it influences the kind of the practice and the activities that we do, but it also can determine how we deliver information. So this can vary. I've known some teachers who just talk and they never use the board. I've seen teachers mostly use the board and hardly ever talk. It's also nice to hear others talk. So through videos or audio, that can also help as well. And finally, when we're working with students, especially in primary and secondary school, part of what we're teaching them is we're teaching them how to learn. Of course, we're teaching them content, but we're also trying to set them up to be lifelong learners so that after they finish school, after they no longer have a teacher there to lead them, that they can continue learning and pursuing the things that they want to learn about. And so when we expose students to these different learning styles and show them that there are different ways to learn, different ways to interact with materials, then we can help them to understand their learning styles or their learning preferences also. And they may realize, you know what, when it's time for science, reading's not the best thing for me. When it's time for science, maybe I need to find a video on YouTube or whatever it is. All right, so just to check in here, you can use the chat here because I think it's not too complex. I have 3 situations here, A, B, and C. And for the purpose of simplicity, I'm just going with the 3 learning styles. So I want to see if you can match the learning style to the situation. What learning style is being appealed to in each of these situations? So we have flashcards that are being put in alphabetical order. So they are going to move things around. B, a teacher explaining the rules. And C, a reading on holidays in other countries. So in the chat, you can write A, visual, B, auditory, or whatever you think it is. And if you feel like you do need to explain your answer, you can, of course, raise your hand and explain your answer. All right, I'm starting to get some answers in the chat. All right. Okay, so we've got A, we've got some votes for visual. A is visual and kinesthetic. A is visual. A is visual, B is auditory. And nothing on C, although I think you guys are getting to it. Oh, I've got a lot of B's for auditory. C is visual. And then Anne is bringing in that reading and writing, right? If we're looking at the VARC framework, definitely. Good. And I like also that you're noticing there's more than one thing here, right? For A, of course, the students also have to use their eyes to see what's going on there. But I think primarily we would call it kinesthetic because they're moving the things around. And so someone also mentioned tactile. We might also call that tactile, where they're actually touching and moving things around. If we look at the framework of 7, some people might even say this is logical because they see that kind of spatial logic. B, if the teacher is only explaining, then it is oral or auditory. Sorry, auditory. Actually, Dan, the way you have it is very clear. Oh, and Caroline as well. If the teacher also uses the board and supplements with visual, then we can add visual. But if the teacher is only explaining, then it is auditory. And C, I would say C is visual because they are given a reading. And so it doesn't say that anyone is reading to them, but let's imagine the teacher passes out a text, or maybe the text is in their textbooks and they open up to it. So mainly this is visual. If we have students take turns reading aloud, Then we add an auditory component to it. But just the way it is, then yes, I would say this is visual. Although, as mentioned by Anne, if we looked at it in the VARC framework, we might put it under reading and writing because of the reading. Yes, I agree. Mahat, the A being more kinesthetic. There is a visual component to it, but kinesthetic is the main part there. Okay, so now that we have this, we're going to go into breakout rooms for our first activity. So let's imagine that you are a teacher. You're going to choose and talk about in your group one of these situations and what you could do to change the activity or add to the activity to appeal to another learning style. This is mainly appealing to kinesthetic learners. This is mainly appealing to auditory learners, and this is mainly appealing to visual learners. So what changes can we make to the activity, or what can we add on to the activity so that we can appeal to at least one other learning style? So I'm going to open up the breakout.
That was too harsh, Mina.
Why?
We
Was it
were finishing and then.
Oh, did you
yeah,
run out of time?
Yeah, but it's okay.
Okay.
Yes, it's okay.
Yeah, I think some groups were a little slow to get going, and then once you get going,
Yeah.
I think it yeah, once you start to think of one, I think they start to roll in. Oh, I also want to say I'm very impressed. That was some of the best participation in breakout rooms I've seen. Often when I open the breakout room, sometimes there's like a room and no one's in there, or there's one person in there, but we had almost perfect breakout rooms. And I realize that sometimes people want to be in breakout rooms, but they have issues with connection. And so I'm not blaming you if you don't go to a breakout room, but I was very impressed. All right, so there's probably some different ideas. Do we have any volunteers to share one idea with us that they had in their group? You can raise your hands and orally share your idea with us, or you can use your reading and writing preference. Go ahead, Larian.
Thank you. I can appeal the kinesthetic, like A. A can appeal to logical. Because the work is to use the hands, that's tactile, but also thinking how they can order in alphabetical order. So I think this require to do it with the mind and to do it in order. That's why I think logic comes with organizing, and yeah, that's how I can say about A.
I would agree with that. What I would like, though, is I would like to know what we can do if, let's imagine you are a teacher and you are telling students to do this, or this is an activity you have planned. I'm looking for a change, an adaptation, or an addition to the activity so that we can also bring in another style. I agree with you. As it is, we could also say this is logical, but can we do something? Can we change the activity a little bit so that it's also appealing for auditory or more appealing for visual?
Oh, sure. Sorry, I didn't
That's
get
okay.
well.
No, I think you made a good point, though. Thank you for sharing that. Janet, I saw your hand go up. What have you got?
Thank you, Mina. So A can also appeal to auditory. where I can say students are given flashcards of vocab words and told to put them in alphabetical order and explain to the rest and present to the rest of the class.
Ah, so having them explain, okay, this one goes here because it starts with A. This one goes here. Ah, very
Give the
nice.
answer. They give the answer as a group.
Very good. I like
Yeah.
that. So it adds another level to it. And then maybe students who are struggling with it kinesthetically, when they hear this auditory explanation, okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you. That's a nice adaptation. In the chat, Anne has said in group 1, we can add a picture to the vocabulary and don't require students to move it around so it can appeal to visual learners. That's true. We could give a choice, right? We could give a choice where learners maybe just say instead of actually moving it, although it doesn't hurt to also have them move it, but adding a picture, I think, would add that appeal. Nice. Evan says kinesthetic, you can use role plays or dramatization, and then visual, and they can summarize either on manila papers or presentations. Okay, so adding that kind of presentation aspect to it. We can also appeal to the auditory learner when the teacher explains what's on the flashcard, when the teacher does it, or the suggestion we heard from Janet, where the students do it. Good. All right, so I see some nice adaptations to A. What about B? What can the teacher do to help with B? Any ideas here? Or maybe a lot of you focused on A and didn't get to B, which is fine. Ooh, I just had an idea for A. So after we put the cards in order, we could sing the alphabet song, A, B, C. And as we get to each letter, maybe they hold up a card that goes with it. So it's kinesthetic, but also adding alphabet song to it, maybe. All right, last chance for B or C. And if you don't have ideas for it, that's fine. It seems like A was a focus for a lot of people. Oh, I see. Suddenly 2 participants have raised their hands. Judith, go ahead.
I think for B, you can have 2 students go in front of the class, then one speaks in the present tense, and then the other one translates to the past tense. You give them to read something like in a conversation. Then the students can now pick the, what do you call it? It's like before you give the formula, you're giving them an experience from it.
So kind of something experiential, and it's something that the students could see to go with the auditory. Very nice. Oh, I see lots of things coming in for this. Oh, I see lots of all kinds of things coming in now. Okay. Evan says after the flashcards, you could ask oral questions for B. Okay. Nancy says on B, learners can come up with a sentence in the past tense and then using the rules to the rules present to others their sentence using the rules. Good. I guess we still have a lot of auditory though, but I like that you're making it more learner centered and getting the learners involved. A teacher can post a chart on the rules on the board and it becomes visual. Yeah, we see that I think often with verb tenses, we see those charts that go with them. Even if the teacher writes some examples on the board, that would add a visual aspect. But yeah, certainly those charts would help as well too. Some people look at those verb tense charts and they say, what is this? And they don't find it helpful, but other students find them extremely helpful. And so I think that's something else to remember about learning preferences. Teachers often teach to their own preferences. And we have to remember that maybe something that you don't find useful or interesting might appeal to someone else. It's something that I have really struggled with. I tend to be visual and kinesthetic, and I tend to often overlook auditory things. Putting the tenses on a chart. Yeah, very good. Chart on the tenses can be generated as a lesson summary. Oh, at the end. Very nice. Nancy's taking on C, the learners to pick out what they find more interesting about the country and do a drawing or print out a picture of it. Okay, nice. Although it is already visual, so we are adding another visual level. Can we find a way to add something either auditory or kinesthetic to C? Although I do like your idea, Nancy, it makes it more engaging for the learners for sure.
May I try?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. I saw Dan says to learners can narrate their experience. Very good. But yes, go ahead. Whoever said, can I try? Please go ahead.
Beatrice.
Oh, go
Juma.
ahead, Beatrice. Sorry, couldn't. It
Yeah,
didn't show.
I was thinking of a situation where you give the students a map, and the map has specific regions, like you want to teach about geography, there's a seashore, there's a lake, there's a dam, there's whatever it is, the physical features. Then you could put the names on a flashcard. So the map is displayed on the wall, and then you ask the students to take the flashcards and attach them to each position of the physical features that they are. So the flashcard having a dam could be placed where the dam is, where there's a river could be placed where the river is.
I like that. So they've got the visual, but then they also have the kinesthetic movement with it. I like that. Excellent. Mary Momo says, to me, visuals more suitable and considered for students that struggle with capturing other forms of learning materials. I agree, Mary. Most humans are predominantly visual, but there are areas where auditory and or kinesthetic, or if we look at the other ways, can really help things. For example, the first example here, sometimes just writing out things in alphabetical order doesn't really do it for students. So the act of actually moving things around, I think that's one of the reasons why sorting exercises are very popular, especially with younger children too. Oh, so I see some good brainstorming. Yeah, drawing pictures or cartoons of concepts. Very good. Yeah, we could even see this with B. Maybe the teacher has an example of the past perfect. I had already finished the cake when you came home, and so maybe the students or the teacher draws a little cartoon that shows a sad person because the cake has already been eaten, something like that. Good. I see some creativity coming out here. All right, so generally, these are just some general strategies here. Usually visual is not an issue, usually, although this can vary by cultures. There are some cultures that tend to do most of their teaching through speaking with very little use of the board, whether that's accidental or not. Actually, so it was something I noticed when I was in Uzbekistan, teachers would give long explanations of grammar points, but they would never write any of the examples on the board. And for me, that would be very difficult. And so that was something that we worked on. Recording, oh, I like that, Lorian. That's a fun thing to do. They can record themselves and send the videos as feedback on the reading for the holidays. Excellent. And you're making this more of a group work too. I like that. So again, I've limited it to just these three because we're gonna, when we look at multiple intelligences, you see that we'll look at some broader categories. So when it comes to visuals, first of all, the board is there and it should be used. In addition to the board, we can bring in images, charts, diagrams. Either we can draw them ourselves or we can print them out. I know a lot of teachers who say, oh, no, I can't draw. And so they don't use drawings to support what they're teaching. But I have to tell you, students love bad drawings. I had a coworker who was the worst artist ever, but he would try to draw whatever he was teaching. And the students made a collection of his bad drawings. They took pictures of him and they presented them to him on the last day of school. So it can be very endearing. Videos are also great. Even people who aren't visual learners, if you tell your students you're going to watch a video, they love it. Maybe in your classroom, you don't have the ability to show videos. You might share it through a WhatsApp group if you're able to do that. But videos are nice because videos give us both the auditory and the visual. They can help a lot. And then also physically modeling things, especially with action verbs, things like that. Or even writing essays is something that usually when I teach writing, I model what it is to write an essay. Okay, I got to think of a topic sentence. Okay. And then I kind of model the whole process. It can be really helpful for learners to actually see what it looks like. If we're trying to add some auditory appeal, we can do some reading aloud. Either the teacher reads aloud or the students take turns reading aloud. It can be helpful. It also can be torture. Personally, I hate having students read aloud in class. They read like robots often, and then some students become very shy. So be selective about it. You might even have them read in small groups. That way they are not so shy of everybody listening, and also you as the teacher maybe don't have to hear it. Audio recordings, having students make audio recordings or playing audio recordings for the class. You may not have the best technology, but most people have like a small speaker like this where you can play recordings. There are lots of free things available on the internet. Again, videos. And then songs and chants can add a lot of auditory appeal to something. You might have a chant where actually there's a great video on YouTube of a teacher rapping the different verb forms like go, went, gone. And so you might have your class create something like that. And for some people, kinesthetic appeal is very difficult. For some reason, I find it easy. I think it's because I often am a kinesthetic learner myself. TPR, of course, would be a perfect example of this. So maybe if you're having students read a poem where there's a lot of actions or a story, you might have them act out what they hear. If they're reading maybe some sentences about different verb tenses, you might have them act out what they hear. Manipulatives, this is what we're talking about with tactile things. So maybe students are sorting different vocab words, maybe they're putting different sentences in order. When I do reading classes and writing classes, I'll often make puzzles out of essays, so they have the different paragraphs and they have to put them in order. Having students walk around and talk to each other instead of just sitting and talking. This isn't always easy if you have a small classroom or too many students. Actually, in my current situation at the university, one of the things that's most frustrating to me is I can't do kinesthetic work. I have about 200 students, and when they move their desks and it makes the worst sound ever, and there's just no room. So we can't do walking and talking. But if you have the room, also wall work is great. Instead of having a text that students are reading at their desks, putting different texts up on the walls and making students get up and go to them can add that kinesthetic appeal to them. Let me come, Lorian, Lorian sent a question to me. Let me come back to that. Okay, so I don't know if you meant to send it privately. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to read your question aloud. Lorian says, I have a question to ask. I normally teach writing skills to grade 10 students, and how can I teach focused writing skills by integrating these styles, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic? That's a great question, Lorian, because I think that often with things like maybe grammar or speaking or vocabulary, teachers often feel creative and can more easily integrate these things. But when it comes to writing, they often struggle because when we think of writing, we think of sitting down and writing. But actually, this is one of the areas where I most like to add things like this. So it can be tricky, but we have to remember that when we're doing a writing class, we're not just writing. We need to come up with different ideas. So we might have a discussion beforehand. We might have a whole class brainstorming, or maybe students brainstorming groups. And so they're having discussion, they're hearing each other's ideas. Maybe we're writing an opinion paper. I don't know, should phones be allowed in school? So maybe they discuss in groups first, or maybe we find an article that is on like VOA or something like that. So the article is at the student's level, but maybe we listen to it and hear the different opinions on it. Maybe there's a video related to the topic, a short video that we could use. And then in terms of kinesthetic, obviously when we write and we can't be doing other things, but we have other writing skills to think about. So as mentioned, we might have a puzzle. Maybe we have an introduction, body, paragraph, and conclusion. So students have to sort it and put it in the right order. It might even be sentences in a paragraph. We might have a topic sentence, the first point in support, the next point in support, and using the signal words and the structure of the paragraph. Maybe they have to put that puzzle in order. Before we do the writing, maybe we want to, maybe I've done this too. I've had short paragraphs that I've put on the wall around the room, and students have to walk around and discuss what the main idea of the paragraph is. And then they have to go sit down with their partner and write a topic sentence for one of them. Maybe they write their topic sentence like on a sticky pad, and then they go and they stick their topic sentence to the paragraph. There's many, many ideas. It's something I get excited about. But if you are interested in talking about it more, I'd be happy to, because there definitely are ways to do it. It's not easy. It requires a lot of setup sometimes and work, and also the instructions can be difficult for students, but there's definitely ways to do it. Good question. All right, we're going to shift a little bit, and I have some questions again for you. Do you find it easy to work with numbers? Is it easy and fun to learn new words? Is it easy or difficult to find your way around a new place? Like if you go to a new city or a new town, do you know where you are, or do you get lost? When you hear a new song, is it easy to remember the tune, or are you thinking, oh, what was that song? How did that song go? Feel free to answer in the chat, or if you think you have an interesting thing to say, you can also unmute yourself and share with us. What kinds of things are fun and easy for you? Maybe none of these things.
May I speak?
Please do.
Yeah, I'm talking about hearing a new song for the first time. Sometimes if it's not in a language that I understand, or if it is English, but the pronunciation, the accent is a bit unfamiliar to me. Usually, like I see many people in our culture, we cook words. We put in some words that look like them, but they are not really them. And then we end up maybe sometimes even singing it in our mother tongue. Same tune, almost similar sounds, but the words are totally different.
I like that. So that's interesting. So something about the language affects you there too. So not just the tune, but the lyrics. So it depends on how easy they are to understand. Oh, I think you could be very creative by making your own words to that. I like working with numbers, but numbers 1 through 100 only. After that, I don't like working with them. Unless it's money. Ah, okay, Antonine. You struggle finding your way in a new place. That's very common. Ah, interesting. Oh, Mary, that's interesting that you find it easy to work with numbers and you find it easy to work with words. We often don't find those things going together. Ah, okay. So Judith, it's interesting that you pick up new words when watching TV. So you have this verbal intelligence, but when watching TV, so perhaps it's related to an oral learning preference. Oh, very interesting. Okay, so Lorian, you're very different. You also like learning new words, but you like to learn them through reading texts. So in a more visual way. Oh, very interesting. So maybe you see where I'm kind of going with this. All right, feel free to keep sharing your ideas. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So this takes us to multiple intelligence theory. This was created by Howard Gardner. I think he originally started out with 6, and now I believe there are 8, although I've seen 7 listed some places, and I've even seen 9 a couple places, but I think generally 8 is what we're looking at here. So we see a lot more categories than with the learning styles. Oh, I agree. Abdumahat, when X and Y came into math, I was a top student in math until that happened. And then I crashed and burned. I did not understand what they were doing with the numbers. So we see some things that I think you'll find familiar. So here we see body kinesthetic. Basically, we're talking about athletes and people who are good at things like that. Oh, get interested, learning new words through watching videos and TV shows. So we have that kind of oral auditory stimuli there. Actually, I think this is interesting here. I should just first give it a. So multiple intelligences is Howard Gardner's idea that intelligence isn't just one thing. We think of IQs, and not everyone has a high IQ. Or what he's saying is that maybe if we measured IQ in different ways, we would find that there are many geniuses. We actually tend to focus just on a few intelligences in school, numbers, language, and maybe a couple other things. And so people who aren't good at those things maybe are thought to not be very smart. They might struggle. And actually, we're just not thinking about their intelligences. Antonine, I like that's very, very honest, but I forget many also. Same here. But yes, I need context as well. Otherwise, it just has no meaning to me. I think that's true for many people. Okay, so we have at least 8 of these. Linguistic, dealing with words. Spatial, so this is if you're in a new place, being able to find your way. Naturalistic is one of the newer types of intelligences that was added on. Some people are just really good at identifying things in nature, understanding those relationships in nature. Music, of course, we know that there are people out there who they hear a song, they hear it one time, and then they can play it, for example, on the piano or something like that. I cannot. If you give me a sheet of music and let me practice for an hour, I can then do it, but I can't just pick it up by my ears. I was trying to say this bodily kinesthetic intelligence is actually something scientists are exploring, that they think it might be the 6th sense. They've done studies of athletes and they seem to just know where in space their body is. And that's how a gymnast can do a flip on a piece of wood that's only like this. I would fall off and break my neck. But other people, they just have such grace and agility. Logical, mathematical. So people who easily work with numbers and those relationships, and they can even include X and Y in it. It's fine for them. And then we have these two, interpersonal and intrapersonal. Some people are fabulous at working with others. They understand what they're trying to say. They understand the best way to deal with them. And others do their best work when they're alone. They understand themselves very well. They understand their own needs, their own abilities, whereas others do not. Nobody has all of these, or nobody has high in all. Okay, actually, let me say this again. We all have all of these to some degree, but some of them we have a very high ability in, and usually we have a high ability in more than one. So this is multiple intelligence theory. In some ways, it's like learning styles, as it seeks to account for learner differences and acknowledges that learners are not all the same people, that they have differences, and so they need to be treated, or they don't need to be treated differently, but we need to do different things to appeal to them. Intelligence theory acknowledges that we have different strengths, and that there are different ways that we can foster these in learners. Like learning styles, this again is called a theory, but there is little to no scientific evidence that supports it in terms of looking at brains. I think we all know that we are better at some things than others, but there might be different reasons for these. It might be genetics, but it also could be our environments, the way that we're treated in learning. There's been many studies about how girls are treated in math class as opposed to boys, and that the result is often that boys are stronger in math than girls. Whether or not we see this as a theory or we see this as just kind of a fun idea, it is definitely true that by thinking about these different intelligences and trying to appeal to them can make the classroom a more interesting place and more inclusive place, the same way with learning preferences. So it doesn't mean that we need to always consider all of them, but it does mean that we want to kind of expand our repertoire about what we include in the classroom, and that we want to acknowledge these different ways of being intelligent in our students. So we see that often multiple intelligences and learning styles kind of get pushed together. In fact, when I was looking for images for learning styles, I found this image. It's kind of blurry. It says learning styles, but basically these are the 8 multiple intelligences. So we see that whoever was creating this just mushed them together. When you were answering some of the questions a couple slides ago, several of you said you liked learning new words. And so you had that that verbal intelligence, but some of you liked learning the new words through text, so more visual style, and some of you preferred it through TV, so like what you're hearing people say. So we see an intelligence and a learning style kind of going together. It's also possible that our intelligences, which we might also think of our interests, that those may influence our learning style. So if we are verbally intelligent, we may prefer a certain learning style. Or of course, if you're musically intelligent, you'll probably notice that you have a strong auditory preference as well, because that is a strength of yours. Basically, considering these can help us to be more creative in our classrooms. And create classes, lessons, activities that are more interesting and appeal to more learners, and just basically change things up a little bit. So this takes us to our second and last activity. We're going to go into breakout rooms here. We have 4 activities. We looked at these same 4 activities last week: writing a story, a poster presentation, a role play, or a team debate. And what you're going to do in your breakout rooms is answer 2 questions. The first question is, what intelligence does it appeal to? So writing a story is probably not really a logical mathematical thing. I'll just go ahead and say it's probably this linguistic verbal intelligence. maybe include some other things. Poster presentation, I'll let you decide. So choose one of these activities and think about what intelligence, or it might be more than one, it appeals to. And then number 2 is similar to what we did in the last activity. You're going to think of something that you can change about the activity, something you can add to the activity, maybe a choice that you give students with the activity that allows other intelligences to also excel in this. So actually, I'm just going to do, as an example, I'll do writing a story. So writing a story is basically a linguistic intelligence. So if I want to make it appealing to other intelligences, maybe I say, instead of writing a story, you're going to write a song, a narrative song. And this might appeal to someone who is musical. Or I might say, okay, you're going to write this story and then you're going to act it out for us. And so this can appeal to more kinesthetic learners. Or maybe I give them a choice. I say, okay, you're going to basically create a narrative. You can either write it, you can sing it, you can act it out. You have a choice of working alone, or you can work with someone else. And so in this way, I've added several different elements to it. So because I did that one, I'll leave you with the choice of poster presentation, role play, or team debate. Any questions before I open up the breakout rooms? I'm going to recreate the breakout rooms so that you get to work with different people. And I will go ahead and open the rooms. Again, if you need any help, I'm out here and I'll try to give you a little bit more time since I did not give you enough time. All right, I think we've got everybody back from breakout rooms. I hope you had enough time. Do I have any volunteers who want to share their ideas, what they would do with these activities, how they would alter them, adapt them, add on to them so that they would be more appealing? And also identifying what intelligence is being appealed to here. Of course, you may use the chat box if you like, but if you want to explain, I'd love to hear it. Go ahead, Ludia.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Hi.
In our group, we were looking at the team debate. And we were thinking originally team debate is more linguistics because of the use of words. And it also takes, because it's a team thing, it also works with the interpersonal. So that one automatically was being used by the team debate.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think we also found that it's also makes use of logical and mathematical, because you have facts that you have to explain and hypotheses you have to quantify. So I was thinking linguistics, interpersonal, logical, and mathematical for team debate.
That is excellent analysis. And then Ludia, in your group, were you able to talk about any changes you might make to a team debate to include some of these other intelligences?
We hadn't gotten that time right now.
Okay, no problem. That's some really nice analysis. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Anyone else have anything? Oh, I see hands are up. And whose hands are they? Rabina, go ahead.
Thank you. In group 2, we looked at role play, and we say that role play employs the bodily kinesthetic. And to alter it, maybe we can tell this, we can tell the individual role playing to role play maybe how they would welcome a visitor, to bring about the interpersonal, to see how they can react to this other person. Then, of course, we also said in terms of writing a story, we can alter it by telling the student to study the environment and come up with a story concerning what they're looking at. And so we thought it could come out as naturalist. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabina. I really like that idea. One way that we can appeal to different intelligences is by changing the topic or giving options for the topic, right? So yeah, a story that's set in nature, a story that's about a singer, right? Something like that. Most definitely. Very good. Thank you. Lorian, go ahead.
Much in our team, we talked about poster presentation and how we said that poster presentation is spatial, like visualizing our work into, put it on poster presentations, and then we can say that, and then we say that we can appeal this activity to logical, mathematical students who really enjoy the mind, and then the work will be having like statistical data, graphs, and so. And if they embed them, that will be better. And then we also appealed to bodily kinesthetic. And that's when we can have students, like we do the poster, and then we can have a guided work used with poster presentations, and also linguistic. When we have one person who is going through, who is explaining more about the poster presentation, just to tell more about the students who are coming and visit, just like exhibitions. So these are actually for intelligences. We found that they can go with poster presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lorian. I love that. There's a lot of appeal there, right? Bringing in lots of them. Very good. Good brainstorming. Beatrice, go ahead.
Thank you. In our group, we talked about role play, and we saw that almost all those intelligences can work therein. For example, the bodily kinesthetic will involve the participant getting out from where he's sitting to go perform actually on stage. So he'll actually do the actual movement. And even during the presentations, he'll want to do some nonverbal cues. Then in the naturalistic, these are the character, the individual knows the character's environment, the social setting, the cultural setting, so that when he behaves like the character is actually trying to imitate. Then you look at the linguistic intelligence, that goes with the verbal. The language is going to use, the word is going to speak, and even the tone that is going to use. Then intrapersonal goes with his own self-confidence, ability to stand in front of people and speak and present his part as a role player. Then talk about interpersonal, that is where it involves the team of the cast, the group of people that they're going to work with in that particular role, the cast of characters in a particular scene of presentation. Then look at the logical part of it. You will need equipment. I will need how many pieces of equipment you'll require, and probably the mental picture, the number of steps you're supposed to make. That will go with the logical, with the mathematical. Then the musical, again, the movements that is going to make, they have to be intentional. When it is like walking, how many paces, stamping the feet or stamping a chair or clapping the hands, how many times. If is that a character, then the mathematical will come in. Come to the spatial, the personal space is supposed to occupy. So that, for example, when he's on stage, he does not obscure other characters from being seen by the audience. So all those types of intelligences will fit in a role play. Thank you.
Thank you. That's awesome. Way to bring in everything. There's a role for everyone. That's awesome. Thank you. And last share, Caroline, go ahead.
Okay, I was in room 2 with Robina, but she's already answered all the questions. So for me, I was actually wondering, I have a question, in other words, Mina.
Of course, go ahead.
All right, so for spatial visualization, visualizing the 3D, the world in 3D. Does that mean like the way nowadays the technology that is being used where like these equipments that look like goggles and then you actually look at nature, or how does that work for the
It can-
the spatial?
It can be that, most definitely. And then, I think sometimes it's easy to look at that and then look at the logical and see, wait, how are they different? Because if I think of, for example, of a map, I might say, oh, a map is kind of logical. But this is also spatial. You might find that someone is really good at a 2D map, but then when you put them in the world, they don't know which way is which. They might be able to interact better by having some kind of a model, maybe something more like a globe instead of a map, or you might find that they like working with clay so that they can make a 3D model. I've seen on like an app I had once, something that really highlighted this for me. It was 2D, but they had a map. And if you go this way, you go through the maze, but then they turned it to the side. And so you had to, if you want to go this way, you had to go that way. And a person with spatial intelligence would have a really easy time with this. Just thinking about it gives me a headache.
All right.
So it is something that I think, especially in a language classroom, could be difficult, but it's not impossible. Something else you might do if working with a map, you might make a 3D map. So instead of, you might make the classroom so that you might make a space between the desks to be a road, and you might make roads like that. And then maybe students have to explain where to go to get to the bank or something like that.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. And you might notice also that this has got a tie-in with kinesthetic as well.
Oh, okay.
Okay. We are running short on time. Lorian, go ahead, and then we're going to wrap this up.
Yeah, I think Caroline has talked about a very important question. Then I might need to think about how spatial, both kinesthetic and naturalistic way to understand how you can. For example, I thought of maybe an activity, like let's say a trip with the students, and then you want them to go and explore. Maybe, for example, where I work, we have a lake very close, like it will be like 10 kilometers from there to where I work. And then if I say like I want them to go and reach to the lake, and then I will want them to use a Google map with therefore maybe any device, and then I want them to follow the Google map until they reach the lake. So I was thinking like as partial, they will be able to use the Google map and then follow the Google map, and then they follow the Google map until they reach their destination. And then here they will be using bodily kinesthetic, but also trying to understand the areas around, understand nature. I means like to know this is the mountain, this is the forest, and whatever. So I thought like maybe this is a scenario. I thought like how we can connect spatial, naturalistic, and bodily kinesthetic. Yeah, maybe even logical, mathematical.
I love that. And I
Yeah.
think what you're saying too also highlights that these things aren't always separate. We can see a lot of overlap between them. Oh, I hope you do that activity. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, we often do that mostly at the beginning of the year.
Oh, that's great. What a good way to
Yeah.
start things off.
Yeah.
I have some final thoughts I'm going to leave you with. We don't have time to discuss, but I encourage you to think about these things. So do you think learning styles and multiple intelligence theory, do they deserve consideration in the classroom? They're not scientifically proven. We don't have scientific evidence for them, but that doesn't mean that they're not valuable. What do you think? And if you think that they have value, how do you think thinking about these things might affect your teaching? So I leave you to think about that in your free time. Here I have some links to some actual self-tests. So if you think you know your learning style, but you want to be sure, these are 3 different learning style ones. I think one of them is for 3 learning styles, one is for 4 and one is for 7. And then this is a multiple intelligence test. There's all kinds of things like that out there. Oh, Margot's not here, and she's the person who most wanted to talk about this. I plan for us to meet on December 6th. December 20th, I'm not sure about. I may be traveling. So think about your schedules and what works best for you. And this is a discussion that we can move to WhatsApp. But I am now going to turn this over to Austin to send us out with some of his wise words, observations, and all of that.